So here we are taking a look at Tunisia, 1943. I've been working on this scenario for at least a couple of months now. I think I'm just about ready to bring it in for a landing. And I thought I would take some time to create a video showing some new features, some old features that have been updated, and some old features that I probably just never talked about before. So I think I have things set up so that I can work through this fairly quickly. Try not to take up too much of your time because I know everyone wants to get to the refreshments in the back of the room as soon as possible. So ready to start, January 1, 1943. It's the Axis player turn. This is the standard default alert that comes up at the beginning of each player turn, and we can see, among other things going on, Axis rail capacity is 6 REs. That might seem a little bit high, but with the experimental supply system going on, the Axis player actually needs all of that just to be able to keep units in supply. Probably not really going to be able to transport any units with that rail cap. Also, the Malta status number, which comes straight out of the Torch OB, it's already down to 2. It does not get any better. And also a special rule in Torch. U.S. divisions can't start assembling until they make a die roll. At this point, they haven't made the die roll. So this is just a reminder that even though it might look like the Allied player is in a position to assemble American divisions because all the components are stacked together in a hex at the beginning of a turn, the system won't allow that to happen until the die roll gets made eventually. Anyway, so we can continue here. One thing that I did, I actually did this for myself. It's probably going to be useful for a lot of other people, though, is I got a new computer and I realized that I had optimized some of the screen settings within the code for my old computer. So I just changed things around a little bit so that now if the window gets resized, then things move around automatically. It just makes it a little bit easier. It's no big deal. So here we are in the initial phase for the Axis player. We can see a couple different things going on. First of all, air strength was increased. Then we have some Axis ground reinforcements. Those ground reinforcements, of course, appear in Europe and they need to be transported to Africa. More on that in a moment. Whereas some other guys, this is actually Rommel and his boys, have withdrawn as far as Tripoli, so they've appeared down at the bottom of the map. They're not showing up in this screen, and I'm not going to bother to click down there right now. We'll probably see them in a minute. So some reinforcements have arrived, and so this is just informational. We can't do anything about it right now. We're in the phase, and it takes us to replacements. Now, the Torch system of replacement REs is a little bit tricky, and it's slightly different for the Axis player and the Allied player. For the Axis player, and that's what we're looking at right now, we have German armor and infantry replacement REs, and we also have Italian armor and infantry REs. They can be used two different ways. They can be used to replace units that are in the replacement pool, and I think if I click up here, we can see there are a few Axis units in the pool right now. We can look at that anytime we want to, and the units actually will also show up here in this screen. For units in the replacement pool, and for cadres that are on the map that want to be rebuilt to full divisional strength, we need to get those replacement REs shipped from Europe because, like reinforcements, the replacement REs appear in Europe and they will require shipping and port capacity to get them to Africa. There's a lot of red in this screen right now, and that's because there are no replacement points actually available at this time. So the screen is kind of showing us maybe what we'd like to do as opposed to what we can do. Any place it's red, it means here's what it's going to take, but you don't have the replacements to do it at this time. Into reinforcements and replacements, we can move on to the next phase. Oh, and this alert points out that I've added my own optional rule here that due to mud weather conditions, Allied air power is impacted more than Axis air power, and that actually seems to be historically the case because apparently the Luftwaffe in particular was able to operate from paved airfields, whereas the Allied air units were stuck on mud airfields at this time. So I've reduced their Allied air availability during mud turns. So here we go with the supply phase. This is not really much changed over anything done previously. We can take a look at a couple things. For example, if we wanted to see the supply radius from the Allied supply depot in Tabessa here, we can see that it just barely gets these French units. It doesn't quite get this French unit. And this is all because of mud conditions. Mud is a real problem here. Mud is going to go on for at least the first few turns, and it's bad news for both sides. So it's kind of like playing football in the snow. Both teams are going to be impacted equally, and they're just going to have to tough it out until the weather improves. Anyway, so we can look at those anytime we want. We can go ahead and confirm the automated supply situation here. So we'll give that a click. And what pops up, let me bring this so that it's visible within the area that I'm recording here. There, so now it's within what I'm recording, I think. So this says, for this turn, Axis player automatically expended 64 supply points to keep units in supply. The Allies automatically expended 56.5. Beyond that, there's a great deal of detail here. There's an overview of totals. There's a look at each depot. Then there's a look at within each depot, each corps, and within each corps, the units that are assigned and how many supply points they need. And we do that for both the Axis player and the Allied player. So this shows up in the supply phase of every turn. In addition, anytime you want, oops, let's bring this down again. Anytime you want, you can take a look at it. It doesn't show how many points were expended in this particular supply phase, but you can look at it anytime you want to know the status of what's going on. That's not always necessary to do it, but sometimes it's a good idea to be the logistics officer and keep track of what's going on. So now we're in the transport phase, and the transport phase is bringing units, replacements, and supply points from Europe to ports in Tunisia. Reinforcements come in as scheduled according to Torch OB. Same thing for replacement REs. For supply points in Europe, there is an unlimited number of supply points. You don't have to worry about that. Got tons of supplies over there. What's the problem? Well, the problem with all that stuff is your sea transport capacity and your port capacity. So the sea cap and the port cap are both relatively limited. The Axis player is going to have to make some tough decisions about bringing in supplies or bringing in reinforcements or replacements. The port capacity tends to get used up really fast, especially in Tunis and Bizerta, which are the safest ports because they get a favorable die modifier on the Malta table for the Axis player. To do it is just a matter of clicking over here on a port. So to bring things into Tunis, we could say we wanted 12 supply points and we wanted to bring in some infantry. We'd run the convoy by clicking down here, and then the system automatically generates a random number. It rolls on the Malta table, that is, and decides, does the convoy get through safely? Does it get returned? Or does it get sunk? So I'm not actually going to do that right now. We'll cancel the convoy and just understand that that's the way it works to transport reinforcements, replacements, and supplies from Europe to North Africa. So we'll go ahead and in that phase. And now we really get into the meat of things. We're actually in the movement phase. Um, One of the first things to look at is let's go over to see if there's an interesting unit here. So this is an allied hex, and note that because there is a air mission target in that hex, we get this link, conduct an air mission, and this brings up the possibility then of the Axis player committing air factors to various kinds of bombing missions, and this shows which bombing missions are available. The Allied player can allocate fighters to defend against the air mission, and you get a preview down here of the bombing table and what it takes for harassment and so forth. So this really hasn't changed. This has been around since, I don't know, the last 4 or 5 scenarios that I put that together. We won't actually run any of those right now, so we'll just cancel that. So back in movement, an important thing to think about is transport by rail. I mentioned that before, how the Axis player has 6 REs of rail cap, but it's almost certainly going to get burned up by trying to run supplies from Tunis down this way, especially as Rommel, who's under here. Let's see if we can find Rommel under here right now. So here's Rommel down here. He's stacked up in Tripoli in this hex, and we'll go back up here. Anyway, so we need to get supplies down at least as far as the end of the secondary rail line there. Now we can take a look here at the rail net. So green is the functional rail net for the Axis at this time, and yellow is the functional rail net for the Allies at this time. And you can look at that anytime you want to see what's going on with your rail net, and it'll also show where rail breaks are and so forth. And of course, there's no need to re-gauge anything in this scenario, but it will show where rail breaks are if any of those occur. So we'll get rid of that rail net. And let's see, what else should we be doing here? Within the movement panel, let's just go ahead and pick somebody. Oh, this is a good example here. So I think all the 10th Panzer Division is stacked here. This part of the movement panel looks pretty familiar. This depot and supply information is something that has been added fairly recently, and we don't really need to mess with that right now. I've written a great deal about that if anyone cares to look into it a little further. So we'll go back here. We'll get back to this. We can see, because we do have all 3 of the components of the 10th Panzer Division stacked in this hex at the beginning of the movement phase, we now have the ability to assemble those guys. And so we can say, yeah, we want to assemble these 3 components into this division. We click assemble, we go back to movement, and here we go. Now we have that Panzer Division available on the hex. Now, by the same token, because we have the full division in the hex, and there's nobody else who can assemble, we now have the breakdown link. We can come here and we say, oh, well, do we want to break down the 10th Panzer? Well, I mean, that would be kind of silly. We just assembled it. But strictly for the demonstration, we'll say, yeah, we do want to break it down, and we can choose to do that into either supported or unsupported components. We'll go back to supported components, return to movement, and there all 3 of those guys just showed up again. So that's assembling and breaking down. Let's get away from that. I think I have this set up over here. Oh, good, I do. So something that is new in this scenario, hadn't really been necessary, so I hadn't written the code for it previously, but now when the system detects that you have a truck unit and a suitable unit like this infantry regiment in the same hex together at the beginning of the phase, you get a motorize option. So if we click on motorize, it's not going to let us motorize that static AA unit. The position AA is I decided it can't be motorized. I don't know if that's a real rule or not, but I decided that's just not possible. But we do have this infantry regiment available. We only need one of these trucks. We could pick either one of them. It doesn't matter. We'll just take that one. And so we're going to mate this truck and that unit in order to motorize it. And when we get back here now, that 160th Infantry Regiment has turned into a motorized unit, so it's bold, and you can see that the movement is changed. And similarly, just like with a assemble and break down, since the system detects that we do have a unit that has been motorized by mating the trucks in the unit, now we have the demotorize option. And if we go into that, we can say, yeah, we're going to pick that guy and we're going to demotorize him. And we pop back up here and we get both our trucks back, and these guys are moving by foot again. So that's the motorize and demotorize option that pretty much matches what happens. And in at least some of the games in the series, you know, the rules tend to vary. Sometimes I get a little confused. To me, this seemed like at least a good approximation of the way that motorizing and demotorizing works within the system. Now, something else that I did, this is very minor, as I've mentioned many times before in my videos and in my written notes on this stuff. The core markers that we're seeing here just indicate that there's somebody in the hex, and if we hover over that, we can see who is in there. The core markers themselves don't really mean anything else except there is somebody in the hex. Therefore, the number and the symbols on the core markers mean nothing at all. However, they are kind of cool. I like to look at them, and I added a couple more so we could go in here and we could change this, for example, to look like it's an AA unit. We could go back in here and change it to an engineer unit, or we could go back and put it where it was as static infantry unit. So there's the core markers. Something that I decided to do, I probably should have done it a long time ago. It finally occurred to me that over the many years when I have played these games in person, face to face, with some opponent other than myself, even when I play against myself, it seems to take forever to fondle all the units and all the stacks to look for enemy strong points, enemy weak points, and to figure out, well, where are my guys? How much strength do I have around here? How much strength do I think I can mass for an attack here? So it seemed like it would be a simple thing to do, to add a new option. And so this view option here, this pop-up menu to view all kinds of different things, this has just been growing and growing and growing as I think of more things to put on here. And the one that I've put on here most recently is attack and defense strength. And so if we want to see what's going on with all of those allied units, so we can decide if we want to attack anybody, well, one thing we could do is we could just start down the front here. And if I put my cursor over that and I look in there, that's telling me there are two defense factors in that one. And this one has 2 defense factors, and this one has 7 defense factors. That's not much faster than taking tweezers to stacks of units. But on the other hand, if we go in here and say, show me the enemy defense strengths, and this pops up and it shows for each core how many defense factors are in the hex. Now that's just raw factors, and it doesn't take into effect terrain or supply or weather or armor effects or anything like that, but raw defense strength in each hex. And so it's a lot faster to do it that way. And if I want to also say, show me my friendly attack strengths, then I can start to get an idea of where is probably a good idea to attack and where not to attack. So that's the scouting stuff I've added there. Now, by the way, right now, this game is set up so that limited intelligence is turned off. And that's why we're able to take a look at all of this enemy stuff anytime we want to. If limited intelligence were to be turned on, yeah, you wouldn't get that. It would say, sorry, Charlie, I can't show you that. It doesn't work. So anyway, let's get rid of those. Not actually going to bother to move anything, but I will say let's end that phase and let's take a look at the combat panel. I've shown this before, so we'll just do it real quick. This would probably be a terrible attack to make, but we'll pop this up. Yeah, 1.1 to 1 with a -3 die mod. You know, probably not a great attack to make, but this just shows the same combat panel that we've seen before. Remember back at the Berber of 40 scenario, I had added the column for attack supply so the attacker can decide for each one of his attacking units if he wants to burn attack supply or if he wants to attack not in attack supply, which might not be a great idea, but sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes the system won't let you put the guy in attack supply because there is none. Sometimes you will choose not to use attack supply because you want to conserve your supply for something else. We'll just cancel that. We won't really attack there. And let's see, the next thing, this is, we'll get out of that phase. We go into exploitation. We'll end the player turn. This is just a minor little thing, but I decided to add it whenever a player clicks to end his player turn. You get a chance to think about it. And the one thing that I discover in playtesting is that it's easy to forget about the supply situation at the end of a player turn. So I just put this up as a reminder saying, look, before you end the turn, you really might want to check these things. And there are quick ways of checking all this. So there are various options in there that we didn't pay much attention to because they've been around for a while. And I think I've shown all that stuff before. Anyway, so you can say, well, I want to cancel that. I don't really want to end the turn. Or you can say, yeah, I do want to end the turn. And that will be the end of that. I think that's just about it here. I want to cancel that for now. And let me just run up here. I have another window set up. One of the things that I added to this scenario is the ability to go back and review an archived game. So you can you can't really replay it. You can't change anything. But you can go through it step by step and see what happens. So rather than starting a new game, the system has detected that there is a file in here that contains an archived game. I've just got the one in there right now, so we'll click on that. And this brings up this little screen here. Each one of these represents the end of a particular player turn. And this is actually the beginning of the game here. That's the end of December 42. The game really starts in January 1, 1943. And then we can go through here as quickly or as slowly as we want. We can go back and forth. We can see where did all these guys go. You know, we can skip, doesn't matter. So it just lets you go back and review the progress of a game if you care to do so. Not a big deal. I just thought it was kind of a cool little feature to add. So anyway, that's the story of what's happening with Tunisia 43. I might have another trick or two to add to this, but I think I'm just about done with it, and I have to decide what scenario I'm going to do next. You'll be the first to know. Thanks for looking and listening.